So welcome everybody. My name is Nicki Eyre. I have an organisation called Conduct Change, and basically everything that I do is centred around the prevention of workplace bullying. And that includes training programs, which looks at kind of cultural change at an organisational level and individual and personal development in parallel. It includes interventions using coaching for both parties before they get into the formal processes, and it also helps people move on afterwards. But what I'm actually going to talk to you about today is my own experience of being bullied in the workplace, because that's how I arrived at this point. And it's really interesting because actually when you start feeling bullied at work, I was about 3 months into my role. I was in a very senior position, and I felt that my line manager, who was a chief executive, had bullied me in a situation. But actually what that did was it made me really just work harder initially. And there's this real period of kind of denial. I'm not the kind of person who can be bullied or anything like that. And so you go through all of that. And actually it was probably another year before I actually went into the so-called informal and formal processes. And so actually I went through the whole process. I had the initial conversation, one-to-one, face-to-face, of saying, I feel like I'm being bullied and I would like things to change. At the time, he just came back and said 2 questions. I remember he asked me if I wanted to make it formal, and he said, what did I think that he should do about it? So very much putting all the responsibility back on me. And everything got better for a little while, and then it got worse. And then I went into the formal processes. And actually, that is the point at which it escalates to a point where it really undermines your health and your ability to work. And I went through the whole process. So I went through making a formal complaint. So having to go back and find the evidence that, funny, I hadn't collected for the last year because I had been in denial that it was happening to me. I went through the investigation, which initially I thought, well, that's great because somebody's actually listening to me. But actually that didn't work out quite so well in the end. It took absolutely months. I ended up off work, but managed to come back to work for a little while. And it was absolutely awful. I didn't want to be in the same room as this person. And yet I had to come back in and write and deliver a strategy for the organisation, for the board. And so it was, quite a stressful situation. Funny old thing, the investigation was not upheld. The grievance was not upheld. I went to an appeal, and I was at such a senior post in the organisation that I basically couldn't find anyone to go with me because they'd all seen the impact of getting involved in these, because this wasn't the first time it happened in the organisation. And I was told at that appeal that I couldn't bring forward evidence from 2 of the people who had fully supported me in the process. And so it was a really, really difficult position to be in. And at that stage, they also decided to do a small restructure of 3 roles in the organisation, down to 2, of which mine was one. And so I had to then apply for a job that I didn't want in an organisation I didn't trust, just to be able to go through those tick box exercises. And essentially what they did all the way through was, they offered occupational health, they offered the mediation, which was, I couldn't think of anything worse than being in a room with this person that had bullied me. And essentially they did everything just within the law and ticking the boxes. And eventually I left on a settlement agreement because it was just too much for me. And I'm just going to share a little bit of the impact. The impact is in so many different areas. And so for me, in terms of, there are physical symptoms. being absolutely exhausted, aches and pains, my back suddenly just went out for no reason whatsoever, headaches, certainly digestive issues as well. All of those different aspects, psychological, depression, anxiety. I got to the point where I just thought, I have no value. If I wasn't in the world anymore, would it really matter? Because I obviously don't have a purpose. And that was how far it took me. And obviously when all of that is going on, then you're feeling really quite desperate, confused. Why on earth has this happened to me? How have I gone from this strong, successful person in the workplace to a shadow of my former self? And it changes your behavior as well. And I did not like the person that I became. I was absolutely almost a bully in myself. So I was absolutely just throwing that back out and taking it out on the people around me, both at work and at home. And of course, it affects your confidence, your self-esteem, your self-worth, and that feeling of just complete shame. But one of the things I don't think that really gets taken into account is how long that goes on for after the event. And it's not just, you've got all of those impacts to go through, but also the financial impact. So I walked away with no confidence at all in my ability to work again. And I walked away with a few £1,000s. It took me so long to recover and to get back to a place where I felt confident enough in myself again, that I estimate that the actual financial cost has been around £500,000. And for me, that's one of the biggest issues, that actually what happens is we go through all of this and then it's over for the people who have been involved at medical level, an HR level, a legal level. But for those of us who carry on, then actually we're left in a really difficult place. So one of the areas that I want to talk about are, the first defence is obviously prevention. So what can we be doing differently at a prevention level to stop these things escalating so far? What form can that intervention take that will be much more effective than going through into the formal processes, which absolutely should be the last resort? But also, how can we support people after resolution? And that is a bit that I think is missed so often. So even if people stay in the workplace, they are going to need a lot of support at that stage as well. So I'm actually just going to stop sharing my screen and just come back to have an open discussion about this. So does anybody want to ask any questions at this stage? Just unmute yourself and jump in if you do.
Hi Nikki, it's Amanda.
Hi Amanda.
I don't want to ask a question, but I went through a similar process when I had my baby. So I felt discriminated against as well because of that. And I wasn't invited to certain occasions because it was felt I would have to go home and look after the baby and things like that. So there was an exclusion process as part of that as well. So the impact does have wide-ranging factors, I feel, that a lot of people don't think about.
It does, and I think people don't actually understand how many different behaviours really constitute bullying in the workplace. And there can be personal behaviours, there can be work-related behaviours, but effectively that feeling of isolation where you're being excluded is really, really powerful in terms of the impact that it has on you as an individual. Definitely. Were you able to speak up about that? How did you feel about speaking up?
I did try speaking up, but the person was actually at the top of the tree, was the HR director, which made it doubly difficult for me. So in the end, I actually left. But as you say, you then get a drop in salary and all of that goes with it when you look for alternative positions. because you're so desperate to get out of that situation.
Yeah, and that kind of, you know, with the damage to self-confidence, I didn't even look at anything at the same level I was working at before. I was looking for really low-paid part-time jobs because I was so worried about the potential stress and impact on me. So, yeah, huge impact that it can have. Just talking there about speaking up, what are people's view about, you know, a lot of organisations say, well, actually, let's have a speak up campaign. You had experience of that, or Chris?
Could I make a comment on that? I have all sorts of problems with this. I think it's because when we introduce these speak up campaigns, what we effectively do is put the responsibility for challenging behaviors and perceived behaviors back on the shoulders of people who are already stressed by them. Now, one of the things that's happening there is that we've all got bandwidth. It's how we come up with creative, lovely things to say to each other, and maybe not such lovely things. But when we feel threatened, our bandwidth closes down. And it's actually really difficult to then go into a conversation with somebody else and be reasonable and, heaven forbid, actually give a damn about them in the conversation when you're already feeling threatened by them. So I massively struggle with this. And I'm like you, I get to go and speak to chief execs and executives, and quite often, and this is an exclusively male statement in my experience, the blokes say to me, my door is always open, anybody can come and speak to me. And it's a lovely thought, but it's not the truth. Because speaking truth to power is extremely difficult, and you have to be quite brave. And there are some behaviours around this which completely stop people talking. I'll shut up now.
No, I absolutely agree, Chris. Yeah, that having that strength to speak up, I don't think really people understand the amount of courage it takes to take that step. And yeah, if you haven't, the accountability within the organisation is really strong as well. So if they have any experience of people not being treated well as a result when they have spoken up, then that's obviously going to prevent other people from coming forward as well. Obviously, one of the other elements there is asking other people to intervene. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, sorry, can I just come in? I do agree. So, you know, I do agree with Chris's point about, you know, when you put the responsibility back on to the shoulders of those who are already feeling stressed, they might find it difficult to then speak up about their problems. I find that we do that quite often. We do put the responsibility on those individuals to speak up and speak their views. But I'm interested to understand, well, what are the alternatives?
Do you have any thoughts about what those alternatives might be from your perspective?
I think what I try to promote when I come across situations like that is just to kind of, yes, encourage the individual to speak up to a not to the person who they feel stressed about or they're complaining about, but you know, we have freedom to speak up advisors. They can go to them, and then that is your middle ground who can then come to HR or management to speak about what issues they're currently being faced with, and then to drive that facilitated conversation.
And at the moment, there's a lot of talk about actually using things like apps and technology to help people speak up anonymously as well. What do you think about those sort of approaches?
Yeah, they're good, but then again, if you're going to be speaking up anonymously, it's difficult to then pin down and get to that resolution for that particular person.
Okay, and Brenda, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, I do, because we also have a Speak Up Guardian too, and I do agree there is something around putting the onus back on the individuals who are already stressed going through then having to raise the concern. The points that you raised, Nikki, about being on the receiving end of somebody raising a grievance and actually it wasn't upheld, so the stress that placed on the other person. So it goes back to my very original question to the first speaker, I think, about that balance between when somebody feels they're being bullied, but actually they may be the bully themselves and they're accusing a manager or somebody else of being a bully when actually that's not the case. How we balance those relationships, how we support people to speak up. But also, I think just to turn everything on its head, there is something about if we're, as organisations, feeling that we have to have speak up guardians, for example, then to me that says something about the overall culture, because the overall culture is already saying people do not feel confident to speak up. So therefore we put a guardian in place. Actually, that's just a sticking plaster, because it's something about the culture. If the culture was right in the first place, people wouldn't need another guardian. You've already got guardians in HR professions, you've already got guardians in occupational health. So actually the guardians are already there, they just named something different. So to me, it's about what are we doing about the overall culture of organisations, and the building proper relationships, building proper rapport, taking lots of things into equations. So I think one of the questions I put in there was around whether we're building culturally diverse organisations where there's a recognition that actually more and more people are coming into the workplace from different backgrounds, and how are those relationships being formed and developed and coached and supported. Because I think if we can try and focus on that, then actually I think Chris made the point when he there was a feeling that how somebody may have felt about a conversation, he approached it as a grown-up. Okay, can you tell me about how you're feeling? We don't all do that, so I think the culture needs to be right to enable people to have those kind of conversations. So I was taking a bit longer.
Absolutely, agree. We are about to close breakout rooms any moment, so just very quickly, absolutely agree about the culture and making sure it's psychologically safe. There's no point asking people to speak up if it's not psychologically safe to do so. My approach is very much about coaching both parties. You've got a duty of care to both parties, and actually you can coach them to a point where they're perhaps ready to have that conversation if they're not there when it first comes to light. So thank you so much, everybody. That feels far too short. We have so much to talk about, but we'll pop back into the main room very shortly, I'm sure.
Thanks, Nicki.
Thank you.